Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of passenger. I was wrong. Tonight, let me tell you what happened on Flight 1183. The gate at Denver International was already crowded that morning when Theo Allen walked up with a worn leather backpack over one shoulder and a 6-year-old's pink backpack slung over the other, because his daughter Nadia had decided hers was too heavy before they'd even reached security. Theo was 36. Plain gray Henley, dark jeans, running shoes that had seen better years. He worked as a structural inspector for a bridge engineering firm, which meant he spent most of his life underneath things other people never thought twice about walking over. He didn't look like a man flying first class. He looked like a man who'd worked hard enough, long enough, and saved carefully enough to finally book seat 2A for a flight to Orlando, where his daughter would see Cinderella's castle for the first time in her life. He had booked it 4 months ago, paid in full. Nadia had circled the date on the kitchen calendar in purple crayon. He found his row, lifted Nadia into the window seat beside his, and tucked her backpack under the seat in front of her. She pressed her face to the glass, already narrating what she imagined the clouds would look like from above. 2 rows back, a woman named Carol Easton settled into seat 4B with the particular impatience of someone whose Tuesday had already gone sideways twice. 58, expensively dressed, a platinum loyalty card she'd flash if given half a reason. She had flown this Denver to Orlando route for 6 years for her consulting work. She always sat in 2A. Always. It was the seat closest to the galley, the one with the extra legroom, the one she'd long ago decided belonged to her by some unspoken seniority. When she saw a man and a little girl sitting in it, something in her face went tight. She didn't approach Theo directly. She found the flight attendant first. Her name was Renee Castillo, 26, 2 years into the job, still learning which battles were worth fighting and which complaints were worth simply absorbing. Carol explained, in the clipped tone of someone accustomed to being agreed with, that there had clearly been a mix-up, that 2A was always reserved for her, and that she would appreciate it being corrected before takeoff. Renee walked to row 2 and crouched slightly beside Theo's seat. "Sir, I'm so sorry to bother you. There may have been a seating mix-up. Would you mind if I take a look at your boarding pass?" Theo handed it over without hesitation. Nadia watched, sensing something in the air the way kids always do, even when they can't name it. Renee studied the pass. Seat 2A, confirmed. Booked under the name Theo Allen, 4 months prior. "This looks correct," Renee said slowly, almost to herself. "It is correct," Theo said. His voice was calm, not defensive. "We've been looking forward to this for a long time." Renee returned to Carol with the news, and Carol's expression shifted from inconvenienced to something colder. "That can't be right. I've sat in that seat every single time I've flown this route. Check again." Renee checked again. The result didn't change. What happened next is where this story stopped being about a seat and started being about something much harder to undo. Carol didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply walked to row 2 herself, stood in the aisle, and looked down at Theo and Nadia with an expression that had decided something before a single word left her mouth. "I think you're in my seat," she said. Theo looked up. "I don't think so. This is 2A. It's been mine since I booked it back in March." Carol's eyes moved over him. The Henley, the sneakers, the little girl with her face pressed against the window, oblivious, drawing something invisible in the fog of her own breath on the glass. "I fly this route every week," Carol said. "I know how these systems work. There's clearly been an error, and I'd appreciate you correcting it before we hold up the whole cabin." "There's no error," Theo said. "I have the confirmation. I've had it for months." Carol turned to Renee, who was hovering near the aisle with the particular helplessness of someone caught between 2 confident adults and a clock that was already ticking toward departure. "Get your supervisor," Carol said, not a request. The supervisor's name was Gary Voss, 49, 23 years with the airline, the kind of cabin lead who had learned to read a situation fast and resolve it faster, which sometimes meant resolving it in the wrong direction, simply because it was the direction that felt easiest in the moment. Gary arrived at row 2, listened to 30 seconds of Carol's version of events, and made his decision before he'd looked at a single boarding pass.
Sir,
Gary said to Theo, "Would you be willing to move to an open seat in row 6? Same class of service, similar leg room, and it'll let us get this sorted quickly so we can get everyone in the air on time." Theo felt Nadia's hand find his arm. "Daddy, are we not sitting here anymore?" He looked at his daughter's face, at the careful hope still sitting in her eyes, not yet understanding what was happening, only sensing that something might be taken from her. "We're not going anywhere, baby," Theo said gently. Then he looked at Gary. "I paid for this seat 4 months ago. My daughter has been looking forward to this trip since Christmas. I'm not moving to row 6 so another passenger can have a seat she didn't book." Gary's professional smile thinned at the edges. "Sir, I understand, but Mrs. Easton is a longtime member of our loyalty program, and I'm a paying customer with a confirmed seat assignment," Theo said. "Those aren't the same thing, and they shouldn't be treated like they are." A few passengers nearby had started glancing over, the careful sideways attention people give to tension on an airplane while pretending to read their phones. Carol crossed her arms. "This is exactly the kind of thing that makes flying unbearable. I have status with this airline. I have rights as a frequent flyer." "You have a seat assignment," Theo said quietly. "It's 4B. I checked the screen behind you when Renee walked back. Same as I'd want you to check mine." That landed harder than Theo intended, and Carol's face flushed. "I want to speak to the captain," she said. Renee looked stricken. Gary looked irritated. And somewhere in the front of the aircraft, word was about to travel where it shouldn't have. I'm sure many of you have already guessed there's more to this story than a seating chart. There always is. Let's keep going. Gary walked toward the cockpit with the kind of urgency that made it clear he'd already decided whose side he was going to land on. And that decision had nothing to do with documentation. The captain that day was a man named Frank Dillard, 55, 26 years flying for the airline, 3 years from retirement, and not particularly interested in spending any of his remaining career navigating a seating dispute. Gary gave him the short version. Long-time premium customer, seating confusion, passenger refusing to cooperate. Notice what's missing from that version. No mention that Theo's boarding pass was correct. No mention that Carol's wasn't. Frank came back through the cabin with Gary trailing behind him. He stopped at row 2 and looked down at Theo with the weary authority of a man who wanted this handled before it became his problem for the rest of the flight. "Sir, I'm Captain Dillard. I understand there's a seating issue. I'd like to ask you to move to row 6 so we can get this resolved and get in the air." Theo had heard this sentence twice now, in slightly different uniforms. He reached into the seat back pocket, pulled out his boarding pass again, and held it up. "Captain, this is my confirmed seat. Booked 4 months ago. I'd be happy to wait while someone pulls up the manifest and confirms it, because I think that'll resolve this faster than asking me to move." Frank glanced at the pass without really looking at it. "I appreciate that, but right now I need your cooperation. We have a passenger with significant tenure with this airline, and I'd like to avoid further disruption." "I'm not the one causing disruption," Theo said. "I'm sitting quietly in the seat I paid for with my daughter, who's been looking forward to this trip for months." Nadia, sensing the rising tension despite Theo's even tone, tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, is the plane going to leave without us?" "No, sweetheart," Theo said, keeping his voice soft even as his jaw tightened. "Nobody's leaving without us." Frank straightened. "Sir, I need to be direct with you. If you're unwilling to cooperate, I'll need to involve airport security." The cabin had gone very quiet by then, the particular quiet of an audience that knows it's witnessing something it will remember. Theo looked at his daughter, then back at the captain. "Then call them, because I'm not giving up a seat I paid for in front of my daughter because someone with a loyalty card decided she's entitled to it." Frank turned and walked back toward the cockpit. Gary followed. Carol stood in the aisle with her arms crossed, looking satisfied in a way that suggested she believed this was already over. 3 rows back, a woman named Patricia Nunez had her phone resting on her tray table, the camera angled forward. She'd been a middle school teacher for 19 years. She knew exactly what it looked like when an adult was being treated unfairly in front of a child, because she'd spent 2 decades watching kids absorb lessons about the world that nobody meant to teach them directly. She didn't say anything. She just kept the camera running. The 2 airport security officers arrived 11 minutes later. They listened to Gary's brief explanation, walked to row 2, and asked Theo to step off the aircraft. He didn't argue. He unbuckled Nadia's seatbelt first, gathered both backpacks, and took her small hand in his. "Are we in trouble?" Nadia whispered. "No, baby. We didn't do anything wrong." He kept his voice steady for her, even though something in his chest had gone tight and cold. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and we have to wait while they figure it out. He walked up the aisle with his daughter's hand in his, past Carol, who had already moved into seat 2A before the jet bridge door fully closed behind them, past Gary, who didn't meet his eyes, past Frank, who had retreated to the cockpit and didn't come out at all. In Terminal B, sitting on a hard plastic bench with Nadia leaning against his shoulder, Theo called the only person he thought might actually be able to help quickly. His sister Yolanda worked in claims investigation for a different airline and had spent a decade learning exactly how these systems worked from the inside. He explained what happened. Calm, specific, no exaggeration needed, because the truth was bad enough on its own. Yolanda was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Theo, do you still have your boarding pass?" "Yes." "Don't let it out of your hands, and check your email. If they bumped you involuntarily without documenting an oversold cabin, that's a federal violation, not just bad service." While Theo sat in the terminal, the video Patricia Nunez had recorded was already moving. She hadn't posted it for attention. She'd posted it because, as a teacher, she'd learned that silence in front of a child rarely teaches the lesson you want it to teach. The caption was simple. A father and his 6-year-old daughter were removed from their paid first-class seats this morning so another passenger could take them. The little girl asked her dad if they were in trouble. He told her no. I'm still thinking about that. By the time Theo's phone buzzed with an email from the airline's customer relations department, the video had 11,000 views. By the time he'd finished reading it, it had 40,000. The email wasn't an apology. It was a generic notice acknowledging his complaint had been received and would be reviewed within 5 to 7 business days. That email would not survive the next 90 minutes. What happened next moved fast, and most of it happened somewhere Theo couldn't see. A regional operations director named Michelle Torres had been copied on an internal flag, generated automatically whenever a flight experienced an involuntary passenger removal. Normally, those flags sat in a queue, reviewed within a day or 2. But Michelle's assistant had also seen the video circulating and brought it directly to her desk with the subject line, "This might be us." Michelle watched it once. Then she pulled the manifest for Flight 1183 herself. What she found took less than 2 minutes. Theo Allen, Seat 2A, booked and confirmed 126 days prior. Carol Easton, Seat 4B, no record of any seat conflict, no documented error, no oversold cabin condition that would justify an involuntary removal of any kind. There was no ambiguity to manage. The manifest told the entire story without a single opinion attached to it. Michelle picked up the phone and called the gate directly. Flight 1183 had not yet pushed back, delayed now by almost 40 minutes for what the cockpit log had vaguely listed as a passenger services issue. Gary Voss answered. What Michelle said to him lasted under 2 minutes, but by the time the call ended, Gary's face had lost most of its color. He walked back to the cockpit and relayed the conversation to Frank Dillard, who sat very still in his seat for a long moment before unbuckling his harness and stepping out of the cockpit himself for the second time that morning. In Terminal B, Theo's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. "Mr. Allen, this is Michelle Torres, Regional Operations Director. I want to apologize directly. I've reviewed the manifest for your flight. Your seat assignment was correct from the beginning. There was no error on your end at any point, and you should never have been asked to leave that aircraft." Theo listened. Nadia had fallen asleep against his shoulder somewhere in the last 20 minutes, exhausted from the morning's confusion in the particular way kids get tired from feelings they don't have words for yet. "I appreciate you calling," Theo said quietly, careful not to wake her. "But my daughter watched two grown men in uniform tell her father he had to leave a plane he didn't do anything wrong on. I don't know how you fix that part." Michelle was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I can't fix that part. But I can make sure it doesn't happen to the next family, and I can make sure your daughter gets back on that airplane and sees Cinderella's castle today, because that's still supposed to happen." 20 minutes later, a gate agent found Theo in the terminal and walked him and a groggy, blinking Nadia back through security and down the jet bridge personally. The aircraft was still at the gate. Passengers who had watched the entire morning unfold looked up as Theo walked back down the aisle, this time with an airline supervisor at his side instead of a security officer. Carol was still in seat 2A. A flight attendant Theo hadn't seen before, Michelle had personally requested a crew change for the remainder of the flight, approached Carol's row, and spoke to her quietly. Whatever was said, Carol's face went through several stages before she finally, wordlessly, gathered her bag and moved to seat 4B, the seat that had been hers the entire time. Theo and Nadia settled back into 2A. Nadia pressed her face to the window again, picking up exactly where she'd left off, as if the whole detour had simply been a strange parenthesis in an otherwise perfect day. "Daddy, are we really going now?" "We're really going now," Theo said, and for the first time that morning, something in his chest finally loosened. Frank Dillard did not fly that route again for the rest of the year. Gary Voss was reassigned to a ground operations role pending a full review. Renee Castillo, who had done nothing wrong beyond following the instructions of supervisors who outranked her, kept her position, though she requested additional training on passenger rights the following month, on her own initiative. Carol Easton's loyalty status was placed under internal review after the airline's investigation confirmed she had knowingly disputed a seat she held no documentation for, twice, in front of airline staff who had access to the correct information the entire time. The video Patricia Nunez posted crossed 2 million views by the end of that week. She never did another interview about it. When a reporter reached out, she sent one reply. "I filmed it because a little girl asked if they were in trouble. That should never be a question a 6-year-old has to ask on a vacation." Theo never asked for money. When the airline's corporate office reached out to discuss compensation, he asked for 2 things only: a written apology addressed to Nadia, since she was the one who'd actually been frightened, and a commitment that crew members would be required to verify a manifest before removing any passenger from a confirmed seat. The airline agreed to both, and 3 weeks later, a handwritten card arrived at their house addressed simply to Nadia, with a small enamel pin shaped like an airplane attached to the inside. She wore it on the strap of her backpack for the rest of the school year. I've thought about Theo Allen a lot since I heard this story. Not because of what he won, but because of how quietly he held his ground while his daughter watched. He never raised his voice once. He just refused to let go of something that was already his. At 35,000 feet, everyone wears the same seatbelt. It's character, not status, that truly separates us. If this story stayed with you, give it a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.